again, I'm Maha, and we are live with you from the LinkedIn Hub on day 3 of Advertising Week. And with us is Kathleen Saxton. She is the founder and CEO of the Lighthouse company, which is a very unique kind of headhunting company where you're not just headhunting, but you're also being kind of a therapist, right? And neuroscience and all this stuff that we're going to talk to. But first, I want to start kind of linking it to advertising and to this industry a little bit and talk about how do you see the talent needs of our industry changing in the upcoming period, in 2016 and beyond that?
I think there's huge change happening. We call it in our industry, now in particular at Lighthouse, horizontal hybrids. That people that used to be specialists in digital or content or television or cinema or whatever it may be, suddenly you need to be an 8 out of 10 at everything. So being this horizontal knowledge base of most things that can happen is important. And we're seeing people moving from the agency side over to the media owner side or the platform side. And all of a sudden, the sort of lateral thinking of what you could do as an individual has opened itself up hugely. So it's a really, really exciting time.
I also think, and what I've been hearing from different people, is there seems to be a much bigger need now for kind of a more interconnectivity organizationally between departments. And so you have to really have your finger on the pulse of what those other platforms are doing and what's happening in order to have really effective campaigns and so on. So I can understand how that ties into that. And what do you see kind of as the greatest challenge for leaders in the industry nowadays?
I think the classic answer to that is keeping up with what's happening. It is almost an impossible task to be ahead of or on absolutely everything. So people are reading far many more blogs, actually even for LinkedIn, actually reading Pulse and some of the things that people are self-publishing gives us a chance to kind of keep us up to speed as possible. But it's a huge challenge, and I think being able to rely on the people that work underneath you as a leader to actually inform you of what's coming up the track, what needs to be invested in next, what is or isn't working, is something that's critical for any leader to understand. But it's a very difficult task. It shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is. I mean, sometimes it's so overwhelming keeping up with everything that's happening, because as a marketer, you need to be ahead of the curve, and there is so much going on.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've heard from several different people is, especially in this field, in this business, there needs to be fresh blood constantly. So, I mean, as a headhunter, how do you think about that in terms of, well, you know, we're putting people and then we have to move them, and then we need someone fresh, and then we need something different. Is it a challenge to balance that?
I think it's a challenge in the sense that, you know, probably legacy talent issues were that people worked in one sector for a very long time. And sometimes they were very comfortable to be in that sector for a very long time. In the UK, where we originally were based, you know, it's very different a little bit to here. In the UK, by the time you're 50, if you're not a CEO, you've probably had your time. In the States, it's a little bit older. So now the challenge is in keeping up to be interested in many other things and to go outside of just your specialism means that you can have an elongated career, if you like, to some degree. But being connected, being interested, being curious in what's going on in the other corners of your business is absolutely critical. And if you keep yourself, you know, in your own little divide, if you like, I think it's a very dangerous place to play.
You brought up age, and I think that that's an interesting one, because I'm also seeing, you know, with the way technology has moved forward so quickly, and the generation that, you know, was born with practically an iPhone and an iPad in their hand, just almost have a deeper and you know, quicker understanding of the newer technology. So do you find that maybe some of the work that you're doing is skewing younger in terms of people who have certain talents like that?
Not necessarily, interestingly enough. I think, again, it comes back to attitudinal sense around technology. If you're someone who is by nature wanting to understand how every bit of gadget works and just wants to play with it and understand it, you are going to be very future-proofed. I think those
future-proofed, I like that.
I think we all need to be future-proofed.
We tell my mom, get future-proofed already. You're so behind on it.
But those of even, you can see people that even stay with very old handsets, for example. It's very familiar and it's very understandable why you do it. But if you're not figuring out what comes next, you know, we work, for example, with Snapchat, we work with Twitter, we work with LinkedIn, we work with Instagram, and all of those things as a headhunter, I have to understand how they work. I have a daughter who's 16, and she will show me how Snapchat works for her and how she's using Discover and various things on it. And actually, that keeps me fresh. But if I didn't ask those questions, some of these technologies could pass me by. And I think that again, is not a good place you want to be if you are leading a business in this industry in particular.
So what do you think in this industry are some of the biggest opportunities for talent right now?
to me, this piece, well, geographically, it's never been better. So if you really want to go and work in a different territory, that's absolutely possible. And as headhunters, we see people that are transitioning from, Singapore to Dubai to London to Chicago, moving around all the time and moving with their families, and companies supporting them to do that. So I think that sense of being very mobile and agile from a literal sense is definitely there. And like I said, people moving from agency across to the publishing side, we're just seeing a greater number of people do it. And you've got Jackie Kelly, it's not Jackie Kelly here, who's gone to Bloomberg, who was obviously on the agency side, an enormous talent. So people like that you're seeing moving all the time. We do a number of headhunts. We're doing a number in the UK at the moment where you're finding some really big agency leaders are going across to the commercial sales side. And the industry is quite shocked about it, but I think it's a wonderful thing. It brings a whole new perspective.
Oh yeah, freshness. Just keep it, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the psychology element, because I don't think anybody thinks of it that. I mean, you think of headhunting as very much resume, here are the skills, what's going on, is this person qualified? But so I want to hear your perspective on that.
So I think I was on the other side of the fence. I've only been a headhunter for 9 years. I worked on the television and radio side, and I was on the agency side for quite a long time. And my view is that lots of headhunting firms, as you've described, are very transactional. There is a brief and there is a bunch of CVs, and you kind of slam these people together and you hope capability-wise it's enough. But actually, so much is about the psychological makeup of someone. It's about the sense of cultural fit. I say often, will the body reject the organ? You could be an amazing individual, but actually when you get into that organisation, it just might not work. So our view is in bringing some psychological understanding, we ask some particular questions which I think evoke a different response from people that are very polished at interviewing. But by the same token, bringing in some of that psychology and some psychotherapy to some degree helps us to really understand the human condition of the person in front of us. And that gives us and them a better chance of being successful when we make these matches.
It seems like it's something that would be so obvious. I see with the online world now, everything is done, like you were saying, so transactionally, and you send, and everything is an email. And I sometimes often think, if you're going to work with someone, I mean, whether it's your situation or any other situation, just if you're going to do business with someone, isn't there also the human psychological element of that kind of meshing, just to call it that? So it's strange that would be something so unusual.
Yeah, I think up until now we may have used psychometrics, so psychometric testing, for motivations and dark sides and various things we have used from a kind of automated system. But there's so much more that happens in the moment. You can tell by something that someone doesn't say, or a moment of hesitation, or a slight twitch of the eye, that someone has either become very comfortable or even more engaged. And the clues that we can get from that, I think, are absolutely priceless. And certainly for Lighthouse, it's meant that I think in the 6 years we've been in business, we've only ever had one person come out of a role within the first 2 years. They have all continued to be successful apart from one, and that's a whole nother story.
I'm sure. I mean, you can't, there's life happens too,
It does.
So just with all the psychometrics and stuff you were going to talk about, that's going to lead me right into asking you about this neuroscientist you brought with you to Advertising Week.
Yeah.
So I need to understand a little bit about that, and he's going to talk about talent and
he's going to talk about talent. Well, we're going to talk about talent, but I think anxiety is what he's going to bring up. So he's called Joseph Ledoux. He's a world-renowned neuroscientist at NYU, and he's a psychiatrist and a psychologist. He's written a number of books about the emotional brain and understanding our emotional brains. And I think both he and I have a continual fascination as to why the leadership in our industry will go to the gym and look at their diet and stop drinking so much and worry about nicotine. But what are they doing to worry about the 50% of our psychological makeup, which is our mind? And so we've brought him to talk about his latest book, which is called Anxiety, or Anxious it's called, about how we can begin to master our mind around fear and anxiety. So when you're going to that difficult interview, or you're going to that budget meeting, or you've got a big board meeting, and you can feel the slight terror of anxiety coming up in you, if you can understand how your mind is actually triggering and working, you can begin to master it. So we've called it Mastering the Modern Mind as our session for that reason.
Yeah, I saw that name, and what I thought when I read a little bit further about it, it was how to kind of channel that anxiety and use it positively.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah? So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think what Joseph has found in some of his latest findings is actually we always thought that the physical sense of fear and the mental sense of fear were totally connected. His view is they can be slightly separated. So even when you think something could be worrying, fearful, anxiety-provoking, you don't necessarily need to let your body feel that pressure. So in our session today, he's going to try and demonstrate how we can retrain our minds and our memories, actually our emotional memory brain, into acting a different way. So hopefully it will be useful at the end of it too.
Well, it sounds like it it absolutely will be. And one other thing, lastly, that we touched on that I was also reading about your other panel is the idea of disruption.
Yes.
Which is very interesting because that word we've been using a lot here in advertising, but from a completely different perspective.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, disruption, how do we make sure we don't have a disruptive experience? How the user or the consumer doesn't have a disruptive experience from our advertising. But you're actually approaching it from a completely different place and talking about industry leaders and so on, right?
Absolutely. So they put me on a Bloomberg panel with 5 men, and they're all talking about technology and
Don't you even
disruption.
worry about it. Oh my goodness, don't even.
And my view is that actually we're going to come at this from a sense of, okay, so if you're a leader, are you disrupting the market or are you being disrupted? And how does that feel as a leader to be running a company that's coming from either of those angles? But equally, you know, you're in charge of what happens next. How does that feel, and how are we supporting these leaders who are trying to navigate us through this disruption? And again, how do we think about the mental support and physical support of those individuals? Because in the end, they're just human beings like both of us. So how do we help and support them rather than just talking about the technology?
Wait, you mean they're not superhuman?
I'm afraid to break that to you.
Isn't that how they make everything happen? They're just
We see the best and worst. We know all about it.
Yeah, you would know more than I do. Kathleen, thank you so much.
Absolute
Enjoy
pleasure.
the rest of Advertising Week, and I hope to see you at Advertising Week in London. That would be fun. Yes.
Joy to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.